Great. Thank you, Gulam, for that important message from UN volunteers and the Secretary General. Volunteering, as we all know, is an important part of the work in the development agenda, and we thank all the volunteers out there all over the world doing great work today and every day. So it was great we were able to get those announcements in, and now we're getting ready to move into the next plenary session. I'd like to introduce our moderator and the team of experts that's going to join him. Our moderator for today's session is Sydney Hushy. Sydney currently is the Programs Officer of the South Secretariat of the Global Youth Coalition on HIV/AIDS based in Accra, Ghana. Sydney is responsible for the Regional and National Focal Points program of GYCA, coordinating the work of 12 regional and 52 national focal points. Sydney has been a youth advocate for HIV/AIDS for 17 years. Joining him, our panel of experts is Gianni Rosas, coordinator for the International Labor Office's Youth Employment Program, Michael Weichert, head of the Division for International Cooperation and Advisory at Germany's Federal Institute for Vocational Education and Training, and finally, Samuel Kissy. Samuel is a student and currently the president of a youth advocacy organization called the Children and Youth in Broadcasting, Curious Minds, which works mainly through radio and television. Please welcome our group.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much, Robert. And you're welcome to the Transition to Decent Employment session. And thanks to the panel for agreeing to be with us this morning for this session. Michael, Gianni, and Samuel, thank you very much. Now, I need you to help me do something. Can you show by hand any of you who has ever been broke? Okay, I have been broke too, and so this is more than important for all of us as young people, that we can find decent work that would help our pockets fill up, and work that would make us responsible adults, or work that will make us young people who earn a decent living from doing work and not getting cheated for doing a lot of work but earning very little money. Now more than ever, when there are about 200 million unemployed people in the world, and 750 million out of those 200 million are young people between 15 and 24, it is more important that we put youth employment high on our agenda so that we can get young people into work. Our panelists today are going to be talking about decent work. They will review the paper that was put together by the ILO, and then we have two respondents, Michael and Samuel. Each one of our presenters has 8 minutes to make their presentation, after which we would have about 20 minutes for discussion. Now, to ensure that we make good use of the 8 minutes, the 20 minutes that we have for the discussion, we are proposing that all questions are tweeted. So please tweet any questions that you would have for any of our panelists to the hashtag #DecentWork. Tweet it to the hashtag #DecentWork. We would only read questions from that hashtag. We would not be able to take people coming up to ask questions, unfortunately. So get your phones talking and ask questions so we get the sessions going. If you agree with me, let's give a round of applause for each other. Yeah? You don't agree? Come on. Thank you very much. All right. So our first speaker is Mr. Gianni Rosas. He's the coordinator of the global programs on youth employment of the International Labour Organization, the UN agency specialized in employment and labor issues. He has worked with the United Nations for several years. He served in his capacity of training specialist, employment and senior youth employment specialist. Prior to joining the UN, Gianni worked on transnational youth employment initiatives of the European Commission and with the Ministry of Labour and Employers Organization of Italy in a public-private partnership that supported the establishment of youth enterprises. He coordinates a portfolio of technical assistance programs on youth employment that cover more than 40 countries. Please join me to welcome Gianni Rosas.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thanks a lot for inviting the ILO to participate in this very important forum here in Bali. So, many of you have certainly had a look at the paper that we put forward as a background to this forum, for this plenary. We will just walk through a very quick presentation where we have the main highlights of the paper. So first of all, let's look at two concepts. One, what it means decent work for young people. So decent work is work that is productive, first of all. It's work that gives to workers a fair income and fair hours of work. It also gives dignity and freedom to workers, contributes to personal development through also voice and representation of young workers, and it contributes to social protection and stability. So another concept that it's interesting to look at for our discussion is the concept of transition. So as you can see in this cartoon, this has been done by young artists. It's quite interesting to see that in the labor market there are different statuses of young people. So, and this is quite a change from the traditional definitions that we have of youth employment. Now, those who are outside of the labor market who are inactive, those who are in the labor market but they are seeking work, so they are unemployed, and those who are employed, no matter what type of work do they do, and the quality of it. When we look at the transition, we have very interesting concepts. So we look at the transition indicators in order to see, as we were mentioning before, there are currently 75 million unemployed youth worldwide, and this is the highest figure ever experienced since the ILO collects global data on youth employment. And what is interesting also is that out of 10 unemployed persons, 4 are young persons. So we can see this in this slide. However, unemployment is the most visible aspect of the youth labor market challenge. It's like an iceberg. So we see the tip, but there are also other dimensions that perhaps are less visible than unemployment. First of all, working poverty, meaning that people who work but earn less than $2 a day, which means that they work but they live in extreme poverty. When we look at the data that they are available on working poverty, we see that 4 out of 10 young people who are working are young working poor. Also, young people are in low-paid work. They are overrepresented. In fact, out of 10 workers in low paid, 5 are young people. Now, many would say, but this is because there is less work experience and so forth. That's not really what we see when we compare data at country level, because in several countries the real wages of workers have been increasing over the past 20 years, while at the same time the wages of young workers have been decreasing. Also, informality. Again, we talk about here workers who are invisible and they have no voice to raise. They are not allowed to have a voice to raise because they are denied nearly every right at work. When we look at informality, we see that there is a high concentration of young workers in informal types of work, meaning that if they fall sick, they don't have access to health insurance. If they want to go on leave, they don't have paid annual leave, weekly rest, and so forth. So to give you an example, in sub-Saharan Africa, out of 10 young workers, 9 are in the informal economy. The share drops to 7 in certain countries of Asia and the Pacific, and to more than 5 in Latin America. Again, also there are other dimensions that they are not that visible, but that they are a reality in the labor market, meaning, for instance, precariousness. To give you an example, in Europe, out of 10 young workers, 4 are in precarious types of job. And there are those who just, because they are discouraged, because they could not find any job, they just withdraw from the labor market. So these are young people who are not in education, employment, or training. Now, going to the program of action of the International Conference for Population and Development, the issue of giving employment, education, and skills to people in general is reflected in several parts of this of the program of action. And specifically, there are provisions for young people in the section that deals with children and youth. This has been somehow the precursor of an intensive work by the United Nations that has led in 2000, with the adoption of the Millennium Declaration, to have a Millennium Development Goal that originally was on partnerships for decent work for youth. And then subsequently it moved into one of the main Millennium Development Goals, that is to say a target of Millennium Development Goal 1 on eradicating extreme forms of poverty and hunger. Also, in light of the current economic and financial crisis, there has been an increased attention by several countries to the issue of youth employment. And in June 2012, 186 member states of the United Nations adopted a resolution that calls for immediate and targeted action to address the youth employment crisis. And there is this, that I have with me, this resolution is a blueprint that gives guidance to countries who want to address the youth employment crisis in a number of areas, including economic and social policies, education and training policies, labor market policies, but also self-employment and entrepreneurship for young people, and last but not least, also how to make sure that the rights of young workers are enforced. So these are the main policy areas that 196 countries decided to review in order to increase employment opportunity of young people. So looking at the progress that countries have done in meeting the youth employment goal, you have a snapshot in the paper, basically looking at what happened since the program of action was adopted in 1994. We can say that there has been an increased commitment by a number of countries to address, to promote youth employment. However, the situation is not that bright currently. Actually, since 1994, the situation for young workers has worsened. Has worsened in terms of, as we said, the highest unemployment rate level and rates ever. There are 3 to 5 young unemployed workers, every adult unemployed. Also, the quality of jobs has been lowering over the past years, and the transition, meaning the time it takes to move from school to work, or from moving from a precarious job to a more stable job, has increased. In some countries, we talk about even 5 years. Another trend has been the increasing of inequalities among different groups of young workers. I mean, we know that we are not all classified in a category. There are different, we are different groups according to our characteristics and according also to the issues we face in the labor market. To give you an example, for instance, if we look at unemployment rates by young men and young women, in general, the unemployment rates of young women are higher than those of young men. Okay? And this is also paradoxical because in terms of numbers, young women are less in the labor market. They participate less than young men. But also another phenomenon is being the increased detachment from the labor market. So the loss of the discouragement and the moving, not searching for work anymore. Now, just to conclude, just few points that you find at the end of the paper. So what is the way forward in order to promote youth employment, decent work for youth? And there again, we conducted a review of policies and programs of approximately 140 countries. I'm not going to go into details, I'm just giving some highlights, or better, taking the actionable points that they are in this, that came out from this review. So first of all, what happens is that looking at policies and programs of a number of countries, it's not clear to what extent they are targeting young people. So in many cases, there are statements that then they are not followed by specific objectives, priorities, but also measurable targets and indicators. Again, just 10% of the policies for youth employment that are existing are backed up by sufficient human and financial resources to implement them. So this hampers the capacity to move from a priority into actionable, into implementation. Also, the approaches are sometimes one-sided. So for instance, they just address one part of the problem, for instance, the increase or strengthening employability, while at the other end of the table, there are not sufficient jobs to cater for the increasing number of educated young people who enter in the labor market. So here again, it's important to tackle the issue from not only the supply side, but also increasing the jobs that they are available and increasing also their quality. Finally, there are two other points. One is that particular attention should be paid to those who are more disadvantaged than others. There, it's important to address the disadvantages that usually accumulate. Somebody who has low level of education, lives in a rural area that is underserved and so forth. There is, what we call a cumulative disadvantage. For that, you need to target these disadvantages. And there are labor market measures, as you will see in the paper, where you can really target the disadvantage. So there are pros and cons, of course, and there are very key, interesting lessons from the evaluation of these measures that can be used to improve the impact that these measures have. But also, another thing that is very important is the participation of those who are affected by the measures in making the policies and in implementing the programs. So the participation of young people in the making of these policies and programs is still very limited in many countries. So it is important also to improve the relevance of what we do, in the sense that if you want to do something for me, I think I should be involved and in identifying what works best for me. So, youth employment is currently at the top of the agenda of many countries and also of the United Nations. The Secretary General has just announced that he wants the UN entities to work out a system-wide action plan to strengthen youth programs across the UN. And of course, the hope is that this priority is kept at the top level and it is incorporated in the new development agenda, in the post-2015 international development agenda. I think I will stop here. I would just like to give you a website that's www.ilo.org/YEP, where you can find more analytical assessments of country policies and programs, and also a number of global, regional, and national statistics on youth labor market. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gianni. So Gianni adds 4 minutes into our time. So we would find a way to take it out of all of it. We want to close exactly by the time we are scheduled to, so we can have more meaningful discussions. As I said earlier, we're only taking questions that are tweeted to the hashtag decent work. I've seen that some people have started tweeting already, and I've seen some interesting questions on there, which we'll be taking later. Now, to respond to the paper, our first respondent is Mr. Michael Viechet. He has spent 20 years at the Federal Institute of Vocational Education and Training. He is currently the Director of International Cooperation and Advisory Services. He has worked in Turkey, where he managed a World Bank project on occupational standards. And in that job, there were some cooperation agreements with Latin America, Asia, and North Africa. And they also worked on advising governments on the modernization of their vocational education and training. He would spend the next 8 minutes responding to the paper. Please, let's welcome him.
Distinguished Excellencies, colleagues from international organizations, ladies and gentlemen, dear youth delegates. Thank you very much for inviting me to the Global Youth Forum. I'm particularly glad to have the opportunity to speak today about the success factors of the German vocational education and training system that are smoothing the youth transition to decent work. As you might know, the dual VET system combines practical training in company with theoretical training and education in VET schools. In Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and Denmark, this system is based on a very high level of collaboration between the state, employers, trade unions, and training institutions. These countries show the lowest rates of youth unemployment in Europe. Dual VET is a successful domestic model. It enjoys an excellent reputation abroad. It ensures the training of qualified skilled staff who possess a high degree of professional, methodological, and social competence and a good degree of autonomy, and therefore establishes an essential foundation for innovation and competitiveness in Germany's trade and industry. Today's young people and their parents both attach considerable significance to vocational education and training. This is reflected in the fact that nearly 2/3 of young people in Germany choose vocational training as a promising pathway into decent work. The benefits of cooperative vocational education training are multidimensional. Trainees profit from mobility on the labor market and from the prospects for professional development. Trade and industry believe that in-company vocational training provides a crucial location benefit. They bear the majority of the training costs and almost three-quarters, which is 25 billion euros a year. Why are they doing that? They are doing that because they are sure that such training represents a vehicle for attracting directly deployable workers who display high levels of professional, methodological, and social competence and autonomy. From a socio-political point of view, systematic training promotes the professional development of people, enabling them to take on responsibility to shape their own world of work and learning. As already mentioned, youth employment in Germany is comparatively low. Ladies and gentlemen, The cooperation with business industry or with business community plays a very special role in that system in Germany. The concept of the social market economy provides the framework via which competition and economic stability on the one hand and social balance and fairness of participation on the other are secured. One particular strength of the social market economy is the ability to react flexible to changing challenges. Within this process, the state is accorded an active role in structuring economic and social life. The principle of combining a system closely aligned to economic needs with social justice is also reflected in the German concept of vocational education and training. The state has a particular part to play within the scope of initial vocational training, providing young people with support as they seek to secure entry to employment and decent work. This is considered to be an important public task. At the same time, trade and industry are given the scope. They need to help shaping the development of future human resources. 70% of initial VET in Germany takes place within companies and is supplemented by school-based provision. Employers and trade unions engage in dialogue in order to develop standards for the company-based elements of training. This is coordinated with the framework curricula for the vocational schools. As soon as the social partners reach a consensus, the national standard for the training occupation is adopted in a legally binding form by the relevant ministries. The differentiated distribution of roles makes vocational training highly flexible and relevant to practice and ensures a broad degree of acceptance of VET within the business community and across the population as a whole. A further important success factor of cooperative vocational education and training is learning in the work process. Many things can only be effectively learned for long term if a person actually does them. The example of dual VET shows that active learning within the real work process is a rapid and reliable method of influencing work and learning behaviors. Acting under instruction from their trainers and supported by colleagues, trainees learn how to overcome increasingly demanding tasks in real work situations. They quickly grow into everyday working life and assume more and more responsibility within the company. They receive feedback from trainers, colleagues, line managers, and customers. Professional knowledge and good work results are not the sole determining factors. There's also a focus on understanding work processes as a combination of individual stages, some of which are interdependent. At the same time, fundamental social competence are imparted and put into practice. A further important success factor of dual VET or cooperative VET is the social acceptance of standards. Qualifications need to be comparable. This provides skilled workers with a high degree of mobility and enables companies to conduct efficient human resources recruitment. Standards create transparency on the training and labor markets, facilitate further skills development, and permit cross-connections between educational pathways and permeability to higher education. Established negotiating mechanisms between the state, trade and industry, and civil society guarantee broad social acceptance of these national standards. The process begins with a joint drawing up of profiles for initial training, the so-called training regulations. They ensure that the quality of vocational education and training is equally high across all regions in all companies ranging from small firms with 5 employees to major international corporate groups. A next success factor of corporate vocational education and training is the training of VET staff. The employment-oriented nature of VET requires holistic methods in which learning and teaching virtually melt into one. Such methods take into account the fact that people think and act intellectually, emotionally, and practically in building up and learning from experience. For this reason, it's not sufficient for teachers and company-based trainers merely to be in command of extensive theoretical and practical professional knowledge. They also need the ability to pass on their knowledge and skills by encouraging and presiding over learning processes. For this purpose, it is important for them to have a rich pedagogical and didactic set of instruments at their disposal for them to be able to offer a profound insight into the real world of occupations and decent work. In my opinion, the final success factor is institutionalized research. Educational and labor market research provide important impetus for developments in VET and labor market policy. Labor market research observes and analyzes the status and development of employment and of the labor market in general, and with regard to occupations, branches of trade and industry, and regions in particular. It investigates the impacts of labor market and social policy instruments, analyzes the experience of other countries, and produces short-term and long-term labor market projections. The task of VET research is to initiate, help shape, and evaluate innovations in the field of VET. Its activities include recognizing skills requirements of trade and industry at a very early stage. The European Center for the Development of Vocational Training in Thessaloniki in Greece has published a study this year on labor market outcomes of VET. And I've listed the key findings in order to flesh out my thesis that dual or cooperative VET is smoothing the transition from VET to decent work in the labor market. You can see the findings of the study. VET is more successful than general education. The speed of transition is faster. The transition is smoother. The speed of transition appears similar across all types of VET, but graduates of work-oriented programs, also dual programs, spend less time without work. And VET graduates are more likely to use previous experience when job seeking. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I could give you an overview why cooperative or dual or work-based VET systems set a fundamental basis for youth transition to decent work. Thank you very much.
Now, I am particularly interested in the discussions that will happen at the World Cafe to find out more about ways of getting young people in the informal work sector or in the informal economy to get into employment, because those groups of young people tend to be the ones that are highly unemployed. So I am really looking out for vocational processes like that and structures like that and how it works in the general picture. Our next respondent is Mr. Samuel Kisi. Samuel Kisi is a member of the Youth Coalition on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights of Young People. Samuel has worked with children and young people with the Children and Youth in Broadcasting, Curious Minds, which is based in Ghana, training young people into leadership and also using media as a tool for advocacy. Samuel has written several papers and worked with several young people on employment and also on leadership and engagement of young people in poverty reduction strategy processes and also integration of the Millennium Development Goals in national strategies. Please, ladies and gentlemen, join me welcome Samuel Kisi for the next 8 minutes to listen to his response.
Thank you very much, Sydney. And thank you to the previous speakers. Many thanks to ILO for a very comprehensive discussion paper. And I am happy to be coming at the end because then I have the opportunity to actually respond to what both of you have shared. I believe I speak for many young people in this room and indeed young people across the world when I say that for young people, the ability to earn a living is more than just a paycheck. In many ways, it is one of those first things that affirms your ability to decide for yourself. You know, you can take that decision, decide how to spend your money, and it's liberating, and most importantly, I think it is an empowering, it's very empowering. And so this is important. When we talk about employment, it is important to situate it within that discussion of how we empower young people. We know that about 1.8 billion young people live in the world today, and of this, about 90% of them live in developing countries. Now, I'm sure even from the discussions we've had here over the last day, you can already tell that it is extremely important that we make the right investments today in education and health and employment. And there's a very strong link between these. We need to make investments in education, education that makes young people relevant for the job market, education that increases their opportunities to be gainfully employed. These investments will also ensure that we are able to harness the demographic dividend that many countries are positioned to get. Now, much of my background has been on building capacity of young people across different countries, on understanding country development plans and poverty reduction strategies and how this impacts their life. And whereas we keep hearing about the fact that young people are a priority, that young people are the future, that we need to make these investments, the evidence shows that increasingly fewer and fewer countries are actually putting this to work when it comes to the country development plans. So we do not have coverage of these in as many country development plans as necessary. All the poverty reduction strategy papers do not speak adequately to how governments intend to act macro and even micro level policies to address the issue of youth employment and youth empowerment. So I think this is an important context to address. I like that we had in the ILO presentation about budgets, and this is also extremely important. So we have a seeming decreasing number of countries that are focusing on youth employment and youth empowerment in their country development plans, and then there's an even lower number of those who are reflecting in their budgets, even the budgets attached to the country development plans or their national annual budgets, what policies are being put in place to ensure that young people are employed, that we are able to accelerate the rate of youth employment. So there are not enough budgets to show the commitment that we are saying we have for young people and employment. There are not enough policies to show this, and I think this is important to bring up. Now, one thing that I liked about the presentation, the very last presentation, is the bit where it focuses on vocational and technical training. And we are seeing increasingly that this has become an important aspect of the discussion to focus on. Different governments are taking that initiative. Actually, on the African continent, the African Union Commission has put in place what they call the African Union Youth Volunteer Corps, and this is aimed at building capacity of young people to ensure that they are able to competitively compete in the job market. So this is sending young people to different institutions across different countries to learn and build their capacity. And I think this is an important example of how technical vocational education and training is needed in these aspects. So we really need to talk about capacity building when we're talking about employment for young people. We need to talk about relevant capacity building. We need to talk about putting in place measures that make young people have the ability to be innovative, to be creative, so that they can come up with their own initiatives. We talk about entrepreneurship, that it is not enough to just put in place policies that hope to absorb young people into the public sector, that we need to have policies in place that encourage youthful entrepreneurship. Now, in many of our countries, the cost of doing business for young people is extremely high. Now, if you look at the rankings that we have currently, you would see that especially for developing countries, for instance, if you take the whole of the Africa region, South Africa is one of the easiest countries for a young person to start their own business, and they rank about 52 in the world. And this is the same for many developing countries. So unless we are putting in place structures that enable young people to easily start a business, to encourage them, have youth funds that support creativity, it will be difficult for us to reach those goals that we've set for ourselves on reducing poverty, especially among young people. We know that there's a general unemployment challenge in the world now, especially with the current global crisis. But in every country, it is even more so for young people. And I think the statistics that was shared earlier has shown that. So this is extremely important for us to focus on. We need major shifts in macro and micro level policies and reforms to accelerate youth employment. We also need to talk about the issue of equal access, that all young people, regardless of their background, must have equal access to employment. Employment that is decent, employment that ensures and fulfills them as able citizens. This is an extremely important issue, and I think we need to situate this in this discussion. We also need to talk about the issue of social protection, and I like that it appeared also in the first presentation. Young people face a lot of discrimination and exploitation, and we need to put in place measures that particularly protect young people in these spaces, especially in the job market. So I will not say much more than to say that I think these are aspects, in addition to the issues that were raised earlier in those presentations, that we need to look into. We need to look at how we can help young people, especially using our comparative advantage in ICT and technology, to ensure that we are able to take our rightful place in the job market, and that countries begin to see young people not as a burden that has to be dealt with, but as partners in development that can help drive all these economies. Thank you very much.
Someone couldn't have summed it all up any better than he has. I've seen that your questions have come through, and there are some very interesting questions. Now, I'm going to read some of the questions. Are we able to project the tweets, the questions up on the screens? If you can, we'll really appreciate it. But I'm going to put up the questions, a couple of them for you, some that I've seen. Now, the first one, which I think is most would go to Gianni, and no, not Gianni, sorry, Mikhail, and it's from Ryan, and Ryan is asking, how can young people get decent work when we pitch them against adults who tend to have a lot more work experience than they do as young people?
I think yeah.
Are the microphones on? Hello?
Can I get the question again?
Yeah, so they're asking, how can you ensure young people get decent work when we are pitching them against adults?
Okay. In Germany, our VET system is especially for young persons. It's for persons leaving school after 9 years. They are between 15 and 20. And in Germany, there is the image of vocational training, that means after vocational training, decent work, is so high that there is no competition between initial vocational training or adult education. So it's a very normal procedure. 60% of our age cohort go into vocational training, and after 3 years of training, dual, that means 70% in the enterprise, 25% in the school, they are entering the labor market, and there's a high likelihood, 80 or 90%, that they are staying within the firm they were trained. And when they then get their certification, their journeyman certificate, they stay in the firm and they work as a skilled or highly skilled person, and this is decent work. So there is no, we don't have the question in Germany that there is, if you finish vocational training, initial or continuing training, then you are in decent work.
So they don't have to compete for these jobs with 80. But then what is the transition process then? Because then these jobs are not new jobs that are created, they're already existing jobs.
German industry, they offer training places. It's a kind of their human resource policy. For example, Siemens, they're offering every year 1,000 training places for mechatronics. And at the end of the 3 years, if the young person passes the final exam, they stay within the firm. Because for the enterprise, for the company, it's a huge investment. They don't want to lose a person because they invested 3 years in that person, and after the exam, there is a 80% or 90% of the apprentice, of the trainees, stay in the firm and work as skilled workers with a several wage.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, the next question, which is from the WAG's delegates, and I'll put that to Gianni. They want to find out how to make sure that internships and work placements aren't replacing decent work for young people, especially at UN and multilateral organizations.
Thank you. Is it working?
Can
you hear me? No.
Let's just use the microphone.
Hello? Hello?
Thank you. Well, this is, guess what? It's a question that comes out in so many forums with young people, but also, it doesn't work? Okay. Is it
Maybe
better
you want
now?
to go to the podium.
Yeah, okay. So I was saying that this is a recurrent question because it's a recurrent problem. I mean, it has become so much of a problem, especially during the crisis, because in principle, internships have as main objective that of providing a learning experience, or as Michael was mentioning also, to provide first-hand work experience, because one of the main challenges, and you will confirm it, is this catch-22. Now, when you go to look for a first job, you are told you don't have enough experience, but in order to get experience, you have to have your first time in the workplace. So, what Michael was saying about apprenticeship, this is an interesting way of combining learning in a classroom with hands-on in an enterprise. Internships, they are particularly important in countries where this work experience component is not embedded in education and training. So, when the main objective is kept, that they give learning and work experience, it's fine. What is an issue is when interns are taken to replace co-workers. Then in that case, it's an issue of unpaid work, and which somehow gives the grounds also to, to get the issue before tribunals. So, and why it has become an issue? Because there is also this carousel, that young people go from one internship to the other. So when you see CVs, you see people who have been on a 2 years internship. This is not normal. And this is because it's become harder to get a job. So it's building, skills and experience, but in a way, I would think that, there is a time where you say too much is too much. Now, the United Nations, this is again a struggle that we are having because many number of entities do not provide a stipend to the young interns, which limits also, you know, the number of nationalities that or the young people who have the means to sustain themselves. My agency is a good practice because it provides a stipend which is equivalent to $2,000 US a month, just in consideration of the fact that, you know, you have to relocate from a country to another, you have to provide your own means, and I think it's what Mr. Kissy was saying, you know, to talk about equality and equity. This is also an equity issue, just not to give the opportunity to those who have the means to the detriment of those maybe who have the skills, talents, and also the principles to, you know, to take this, this opportunity.
Yeah, I want to ask as a follow-up the same question about competition within the UN especially, where experience seems to be that one thing that you need to get employment. Yet you have said that most young people are not able to transition into the real jobs from their internship position because they tend to do a lot more internship. And I think that for young people, they would do the internships because that is the only opportunity they can find, not because the jobs are available and they are not taking the opportunity.
Yes, two things. One on the competition, and as Michael was mentioning, in real terms, if the jobs are there, there is no competition. I mean, in the German labor market, because we have to say that not only there is this organization from the apprenticeship system, but there is also a labor market that generates jobs. I mean, it has been resilient also during the crisis. So, on the one hand, and we go back to what we were mentioning before, there are opportunities, no, for you to get ready for the labor market, but at the same time, there are jobs waiting for you. So that's a bit the issue that, for instance, we don't have in countries where there is an increasing level of education. We don't have to forget that the current generation, and I would not talk about the future because we have to talk about now. No, the current generation is the most educated than ever. But in countries, for instance, we have an example in North Africa, where, in the Maghreb countries, where there has been increasing educational levels, but at the same time, the labor market was not generating jobs to accommodate these higher educated young people. So there is also an issue, and I think that you will be debating it in the work affair of underemployment. How many people have acquired very high level of skills and are holding jobs that they require lower level skills? Now, going back into the equality issue, young men and young women. Young women in many countries, they compete for the same job with young men, but with higher levels of education and qualification. So there again, you know, these are the issues, but in real terms, because this is something that is highlighted in several instances. No? For instance, in some countries, they increase retirement age. So this is taking out opportunities for young people to get jobs. But there is not such a replacement. It's more of a complementarity. What you can count on is the domino effect, but you cannot replace somebody who is entering the labor market with somebody who has been working for so many years.
Okay. Thank you very much. Samuel, before I ask you a substantive question, do you have a take on this transitioning?
Thank you very much. I think the issue of competitiveness and young people competing with much more experienced people in the job market is a real issue and one that has to be addressed. We have seen that in certain countries, different steps are being put in place. For instance, in my own country, there is what we are calling the National Youth Employment Program, which then offers young people, graduates and those who are not graduates as well, the opportunity to get on-the-job skills that then helps them to move on from that program to become more competitive and to find a place in the job market. In other countries, I can talk about the National Youth Development Agency in South Africa. I can talk about initiatives in Namibia and other places where the government is putting in place funds that help young people, especially young people who are starting a business on their own. We know the challenges that they face, that they usually do not have the expertise in developing a comprehensive business plan and getting banks to, for instance, give them loans and things like that, because they are considered to be risky. So through public-private partnerships, these young people are then given loans. They are also guided, in addition, on how to develop a comprehensive business plan, how to put in place all those structures that will then make them competitive after some time. So by about 3 years or so of being in a program like this, that up-and-coming company that was started by the young person would be in a position now to go on its own, reach out to banks and other institutions, and be a viable institution on its own. And I think that these are examples of some of the good things we can do. But it needs investments from government. Governments need to appreciate that this is a real issue, that young people need to be enabled. We need to create an opportunity. We need to even put in incentives for the private sector to want to build young people's capacity, to want to give them these opportunities. Until the private sector has the incentive to do so, through various means that the governments can do, it will not happen. So we are saying that this is an issue, and we need deliberate effort from government to make this happen.
Following up to that, I want to know how young people can take advantage. It's actually a question from Alex Farrow. How young people can take advantage of technology and creativity to create jobs for themselves without depending on government or the private sector, so to speak.
Yeah, so I'm sure in this room, especially seeing how we are taking questions on Twitter, it is no news that we are in an age now that we can do so many things with ICT and social media. And for the first time, I guess, we have young people who are billionaires. And this has only been the case because of opportunities that were presented through ICT. We know big economies that are making strides because of the role young people are playing in those countries using ICT. So it is clear that young people have an advantage in that sense. And I think that is one of the areas that we should be focusing on, ensuring that we are able to guide young people in terms of the business aspects of it, so that they can, help to drive the economy using their comparative advantage in ICT. So I mentioned this earlier in my remarks, and I think this is an important avenue. I have not as yet seen deliberate policies by governments to want to engage with young people on this particularly. Much of what we have seen has been out of the initiative of young people themselves. And while this is good, just as I was saying earlier, I think that, once we identify things that are working and working well, we need government to be able to put in place structures and policies and programs that will help bring this to scale and make sure that young people, more and more young people get it. Also, especially because we're talking about the link between education and employment, ICT education is extremely important. So we need to make sure that we are not only giving young people an education, but we are giving them also an education in ICT. So that regardless of where a young person is born, whether that person is born in Togo, in Malaysia, in China, in Egypt, that young person has the ability to compete in what is becoming an increasingly small and global world.
Okay, thanks, Samuel. Now, we have some 7 minutes more to go, 5 of which I was supposed to use for my closing remarks, but I want to dedicate that to the floor so we get your views coming in as well from in-house. So we can take maybe one question, one opinion, probably. So if anybody has any, please put up your hand. We'll get the microphone to you, and then we get a question or two for the panel. Yeah? So we have the young lady there, and then we have our fine gentleman here as well. Can we get a microphone to them, please? There. Please tell us your name and then the country you are from, and then you can go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ruth Ennis, and I'm from Ireland. And speaking on decent work, I would like to belong to a generation of inclusion. Therefore, when talking about access to decent work, I believe that we need to bring a voice for those who are most vulnerable in our society, for those who are invisible in our society, for those who are most unappreciated. And in that, I am talking about undocumented migrants who are working at the base of our social structures so that we can be here today as the privileged. I am talking about I'm talking about people with disabilities who have so much to contribute but are often denied that opportunity because we see them only for the ability they lack and not for the many abilities that they have. I am talking about sex workers who are often denied their humanity and dignity because we cannot understand or relate to how they feel. But let me help you a little bit, because as a sex worker, to have decent work, what you need is what all women wish and deserve to have. We deserve to feel free and safe from violence and sexual harassment during nighttime hours. We deserve to dress how we want, be it religious, cultural, or otherwise, and not be judged for that dress. We deserve to have the skills and power to negotiate in the bedroom. We deserve to be respected for all our roles in society. Therefore, I think us here, we have a responsibility to give the voice to those groups who don't have a voice. We have the responsibility to call for the protection of their human rights and for their right to decent work with legal recognition. And we have the responsibility to give them a voice, and with the aim of giving them a space or securing them a space where they can speak for themselves, just like we, as young people, fought and struggled with the support of many compassionate adults so that we could have our own voice and a space for our voice to be heard. And look at us here today. That is what we're doing at the Global Youth Forum. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I would encourage, let's keep the questions and comments short if we want to get other people talking as well, because it's very limited time that we have. And I would also encourage that some of these opinions and also some of these ideas, you would want to take them to the work cafe and let them reflect in the recommendations that come out of those group discussions. Now, we'll take your question or comment.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stefan, and I'm a youth advocate for Choice for Youth and Sexuality. Hello to the panel members. Many Twitter comments were made on equal opportunities for men and women on the work floor. And as we know, there has always been a problem with gender equity leading up to employment, but also on the work floor, and gender violence on the work floor. So I would like to invite the panel members to maybe reflect on how we can ensure gender equity, how we can ensure that there is no gender violence on the work floor, and especially for young women who are about to be employed. Thank you.
Okay. Can we have one last one? Yeah?
Hello, my name is Nefeli. I'm here representing the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts, and I come from Greece. So, with the current socioeconomic crisis, lots of countries, even in the global north, have very high rates of young women suffering from unemployment. So, what is targeted intervention to ensure to address this? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Now I'll bring the discussion to the side of the table. Can we take some two minutes each and to respond to these questions and comments? We'll start with Gianni.
Is it working?
Mine is, so.
Okay, let's do it with this one. Well, first of all, I think I mean, I really like these interventions that they give a voice to those who really do not have a voice. And I think it's our obligation because, you know, we are also in international environments like these forums. It's not that automatic to have the representation of these young people. So it's very important for us that we use our power and our tools to give voice to those who are unnoticed because they do not have rights. And you remember the big man with the young in the cartoon. Now, another thing is, first of all, I wanted to apologize. I was looking at some of the Twitters that were quite interesting. We must admit that we are very gender imbalanced, and I wanted to apologize for this. In future, we will take remedies not to come on the podiums if we are not 50-50. But the issue that was mentioned, yeah, it's very important to make this statement or to, you know, to have a kind of civil rebellion also on these things. The issue of ensuring equality and also make sure that there are not, you know, abuses in the workplace, especially for young women, it's very important. There are several international instruments. Of course, this becomes more complicated in some countries that do not have these types of instruments, have not ratified these types of instruments, or where there is you know, total closure in terms of workplace policies. But I think that in this respect there has been quite an advancement. Now, how to redress imbalances? There are so many positive actions. So when we talk about targeted interventions, it's really using some instruments to redress these imbalances, be it in terms of gender or be it in terms of those who are excluded. So actually, this, when we were talking about targeted labor market measures, this is to redress these imbalances, to promote equity, and to smooth labor market inefficiencies. So the instruments are there. It's important, you know, to use them and, you know, to go from statements into concrete action.
Thank you. You'll pass the microphone on.
In Germany, we have the same. We have the problem for many years in the labor market that we have these classical female occupations and male occupations. And this is not a problem, but the problem comes when you take a look at the payment, because the female occupations are mostly the occupations in the service sector, and the payment is normally less than the technical occupations. What the government introduced, and this was quite successful, to have these girls' days. That means that young women, being 9th or 10th grade, before they go into the vocational training sector, have the chance to do some practical, to do some attachments in male occupations. And this is a project, it came up 10 years ago, and you can see there's really a change of mindset. You have, in the last year, when I see we have around 1.8 million trainees in the system, and it was before, it was the ratio 35 to 65, and now it changed to 45 to 55, and also it changed that we have now a lot of young women going to dominated male occupations. So this is a program that was introduced by the government, and it's working, but it's very hard to change these kind of mindsets.
Thank you. Samuel.
Thank you very much. I think in conclusion, I'd particularly like to thank those in the audience for the comments that were made that are very important issues. And I think when we talk about employment, we need to ensure that there is equity, there is equal access for those who are particularly hugely impacted by unemployment and underemployment. and we need to think in terms of how we can use employment as a means of empowerment. And this is the point I was speaking to earlier. I think it is curious, for instance, when you think about the fact that the country that has the highest level of graduate females also has restrictions on what courses those females can study. And this just shows some of those imbalances that we have. So it is important. As a young person, I cannot wrap my head around why different people will earn different amounts for the same job. And I think these are some of the things we need to be changing fundamentally. So I agree that we need to invest more in educating young people, in education that makes them more relevant for the job market. We need to invest in building their capacity. We need to focus on going the extra mile to make sure that young people can find a comfortable place in the competitive and ever-changing job market. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Please, let's put our hands together for our panel. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Michael, and thank you, Samuel, for the insights, and Jenny for putting together the paper, and the insightful presentation on the German vocational training process, and also Samuel for your response on how we can engage young people to creating jobs for people. And you have been an awesome audience as well, and thanks for the comments that you sent in. I must also emphasize that we would ensure that in the future, like Gianni said, we balance the panel. I'm also happy that they represented all of the different views as much as they could, and also took into perspective the responses that each one of you have. Now more than ever, I would say again that creating jobs for young people is a crucial part of development, is a crucial part of promoting the youth movement. Imagine every one of us has decent jobs, created decent jobs that are employing a huge number of young people. Imagine the power that we would have at the table of negotiating. A lot of times we are not able to do that because of the economic dependence on adults and also on the rest of the world. So we look forward to recommendations in the Work Cafe, strategies that are practical, strategies that are straightforward, strategies that are workable, strategies that can work across the globe, and strategies that can stand the test of time. So over the next 20 years, we are sure that these strategies would not have to change because they were robust when they were created. They were created by young people who understand their needs and put these needs forward. Thank you, and looking forward to being part of the discussions and seeing your recommendations at the end of it.